Hi guys, so today I'm going to be talking about habit 6, which is mindfulness all day, every day. So having carried on from habit 5, manage your state, we are now very much still in the section of mental discipline. Mindfulness is present moment awareness, at least that's how we define it under the 7 habits, and I find that a very useful way to think about what mindfulness is in a nutshell, because there are a lot of different definitions across different schools of thought and lineages, and this definition of simply present moment awareness, I feel, encompasses what we need to bear in mind as we consider mindfulness in the context of the 7 habits. One way in which mindfulness is differentiated from the previous habit, manage your state, is that in mindfulness we are simply being aware. We're not trying to do anything per se, we're not trying to exert the mind in any way, we're simply paying attention to what is arising in consciousness moment by moment and keeping pace with that. Now, it's certainly the case that there are tips that we can rely on here as a way to guide our practice a bit better, and I'll be going through a few of those in this video, but at a high level, what we're talking about here in mindfulness is simply present moment awareness. Now, mindfulness isn't really something that Jung talked about explicitly very much. This is where we start to look more to the Eastern traditions, such as Buddhism, for some guidance around our actual mental discipline practice. Because as much as Jung didn't talk about it so much, it wasn't really his remit, at least how to practice in daily life to attain individuation. It is absolutely the case that someone on the path to individuation will absolutely need awareness of mind and present moment awareness in order to integrate their mind. Because of course, if we're not aware of what's coming into the mind, we simply can't do anything with it. And mindfulness is in many ways that kind of framework or structure that pervades our daily life at all moments, that we use to notice what's going on, and then we can actually deal with it in a skillful way. And that's a really important point actually, because not only does mindfulness allow us to engage with our own mind more skillfully, it actually gives us the space for us to be able to respond to the world more skillfully as well. So it's one thing, for example, to set the intention to practice skillful communication and speak words that are true and kind and useful. But of course, in order to do that, we actually need to be watching our own mind so that when the temptation arises to say something that's not particularly helpful, we can actually notice what's happening with mindfulness, and then we can stop ourselves and choose a more skillful course of action. And in doing that, we are of course then conditioning the world to respond to us in a more favourable way and improve our relationships and so on. But moreover, we're really improving our own mind and the way our mind relates to experience. So if we look back to how mindfulness is viewed in the Eastern traditions, particularly Buddhism and the ancient Indian practices, the Pali word, which is the ancient Indian language that we think the Buddha spoke, the Pali word for mindfulness is sati, which we think means something similar to our words remember or recollect. So I would ask you, what is the opposite of remember? Is it to forget? How about dismember? If we think about it, what our mind is like if we're not really paying attention is it's a bit dismembered, it's a bit all over the place. There may be what we're conscious of, and that might bounce around from moment to moment, but by and large, our minds can be pretty fragmented. You know, they're called this way, they're dragged that way, or what's this? You know, another object over here. And so mindfulness recollects all these disparate, fragmented inclinations of mind and directs our consciousness to what is happening right now. So in other words, we are directing consciousness to what is happening rather than taking our hands off the wheel, so to speak, and allowing consciousness to be directed by whatever inclinations exist in the unconscious. Then, in turn, by being present with what is actually happening, this also is very conducive to seeing things as they really are, not in terms of a story or narrative that our mind is saying, born out of this disparate, fragmented awareness, but by being directly present with what is actually happening. And of course, by seeing things as they really are, we're then far better able to make skillful decisions, such as abiding by the remaining habits. So mindfulness in many ways sort of wraps together the other habits during daily life, so we're actually better able to execute on the other habits in life. Now I'm going to share with you 3 key facets associated with habit 6, which can help guide our practice of mindfulness all day, every day. So the first facet of practicing habit 6 is to recognize what is happening. This is often thought of as really the very basis of mindfulness. It is the tendency to notice what is happening. It really is that simple. Can we keep pace with what is happening? Can we maintain our attention to what we're doing in the present moment? Or is our mind being pulled off in all these various directions? So a way to practice this first facet of recognizing is simply to notice when the mind has been pulled off to something other than what you're attempting to do in that present moment. The Buddha was quite clear on this particular point. He really encouraged us to focus on one thing at a time. He even said, when you're eating, know that you're eating. When you're walking, know that you're walking. He even said, when you're defecating, know that you're defecating. So in other words, when you're doing something, just do that one thing. What I would encourage you to do is, when you eat a meal, just eat a meal, as the Buddha said, and just watch your mind. Like if you're accustomed to, say, watching TV or looking at your phone whilst you're eating, just see what happens if you don't do that, if you just eat. But what I'd like to pay attention to is, what does your mind do? Does it feel a kind of discomfort? Is it longing for something else to do whilst it eats? Now, this kind of practice can really tell us something about our mind and our tendency to recognize. And this is a really important first facet, because unless we can recognize, there's not a lot else we can do. When we're looking to take responsibility for our mind, when we're looking to cultivate wholesome intentions, when we're practicing skillful communication, when we're executing in our livelihood and delivering value and contribution, whether we're applying habit 5 and managing our state to abandon unwholesome mind states and cultivate wholesome mind states, we need mindfulness to do any of that stuff. So this ability to recognize first what is going on is really powerful, really useful, and really important in daily life. Now let's talk about the second facet of how we can practice mindfulness all day, every day. And that is what's known as bare attention. So this is quite literally the raw sensation of what we're experiencing. So whether it is a bodily sensation, whether it's a feeling, something that's pleasant or painful or neither pleasant nor painful, whether it's a thought or emotion, can we just pay bare attention to it without judgment, without fostering further thoughts around it? It is just the raw sensation, it is just the raw experience. So for example, if we hear a bird tweeting, ordinarily we might go, oh, that's a bird, and then we might go, oh, that's a nice sounding bird, or oh, that's quite a harsh sounding bird. But what we're doing with bare attention is we're coming back purely to the direct raw experience, and we're just hearing the sound. There is just sound, and we leave it there. And so in practicing bare attention, we're really putting a stop between what we're actually experiencing and then all the additional labeling and judgments that the mind tends to put onto that. The mind does that because in some ways that is useful and it has helped us and that's helped us survive, and it's also proven very useful to the ego in the past to help us socially belong. It helps us navigate our experience. But actually it's quite misleading, because what we're really experiencing there is not a bird, it's not a bird song, it is a sound which we then go on to think about and label and then associate feelings with. So as a matter of direct experience, all there is our own mind, and bare attention is just bringing us back to that pure, raw experience of what is happening. And as part of bare attention as well, we practice acceptance. So say we're experiencing a painful emotion, we start to feel very sad, or we start to feel very angry, by just paying attention to the bare experience, we then naturally start to accept the experience. And so in other words, we no longer resist it, because by resisting it, we start to give it fuel. You know the saying that what we resist persists. And so in practicing bare attention, we're actually really accepting what is going on. We're just allowing the experience to flow through us, rather than push it away, resist it, try and make it stop. This resistance, of course, is a large part of how certain aspects of our personality and who we think we are and the persona come to form. It's like if we push away certain feelings and certain ideas, then we start to identify with the ones we like and the ones that seem to work by way of allowing us to belong socially. We then disidentify with those other aspects, and we then push them into the shadow, where they re-emerge inevitably at some point and govern our decisions without our conscious knowing of it. So it's really important that we practice bare attention and just simply allow whatever's coming up to flow through us without resistance. So the third facet of habit 6 is what we call clear comprehension. An extended way of thinking about this is clear comprehension of causes and consequences. So like with bare attention, clear comprehension also sees what's happening very clearly, but it sees a different aspect of what's happening. Rather than seeing the raw experience, clear comprehension understands how the experience has come to be and what is to persist if it carries on in this way, or if I carry on this way, if I keep making these decisions, or if this mind state is not dealt with consciously. So clear comprehension is not about thinking about what's happening, but it's simply about being aware of the causes of an occurrence in consciousness and the consequences. So let's take a really simple example. Let's say that we notice that an urge arises to eat a really large piece of chocolate cake. Now, there's firstly the recognition, but then clear comprehension might kick in, and it might see directly the causes of how this craving has arisen. It might understand that it's arising because of my mental state, it's arising because I have low blood sugar. It could be anything, and it would depend on the individual. It might be that I'm feeling a bit low today, I've had a rough day at work, and actually there's a conditioning there that associates chocolatey, sugary food with a relief from the discomfort that one experiences at the end of a stressful day's work. So clear comprehension not only sees how that craving has arisen, under what conditions it has arisen, but it also sees the consequences of both acting on the decision to, say, just give in and eat the cake, or choosing on this occasion to maybe apply habit 5, manage your state, and abandon the temptation. So clear comprehension sees directly, not think about it, but sees the causes and the consequences of various courses of action. Now, I've deliberately chosen quite a benign example there because it really depends on the person, the situation. I don't want to say that eating chocolate cake isn't harmful, because for some people it is harmful, but for other people it's actually a very benign choice. And it's not so much about the magnitude of the choice to eat chocolate cake or not. It's really about applying clear comprehension for the individual so that they can make the choice for them that is most conducive to wholeness and to improving the state of their mind. So clear comprehension is needed to do that. It needs to understand how something has arisen and where it's going if pursued or not pursued. Clear comprehension also answers the question, why am I doing what I'm doing? So in that example, it knows why the inclination has arisen, and it then knows why the choice is either made to eat the cake or not eat the cake. Mindfulness practice in this way means that we are continually aware of why we're doing what we're doing, because often the motivation is not conscious, right? So by practicing clear comprehension, it's really encouraging us to pay attention to our minds, see what's going on. We're noticing whether what we're doing is wholesome or unwholesome, i.e. is it conducive to attaining wholeness and joy and peace, or is it conducive towards a suffering state or an unwholesome state of mind? So as we practice clear comprehension, we're becoming a lot more conscious of why it is we're doing what we're doing. Let's bring Carl Jung back into the picture a bit here. So Carl Jung is known for his theory of type, personality type, and one of the dichotomies he identified in the way people seem to prefer seeing the world is this dimension between sensors on one hand and intuitives on the other. So this is people who prefer sensory input, like they're naturally drawn to experiencing the world through their five senses, and then people who are naturally drawn to experiencing the world through their intuition, what things mean, where they've come from, where they're going, and the patterns behind the experience. And so if you've been particularly observant, you might notice that these second two facets, this bare attention and clear comprehension, are roughly analogous to the preferences of sensing and intuition. In other words, people with a preference for sensing are probably more likely to find the bare attention aspect a little bit more natural, a little bit more easy, whilst people with a preference for intuition are more likely to find the clear comprehension a little bit more accessible, a little bit more natural. But of course, we all need to practice both, and to use a Jungian term, we in order to attain individuation, we need to be able to integrate the opposites, because both of these facets are seeing clearly. You can't say that neither of those are, or only one of those is seeing clearly and the other one isn't. They're both seeing clearly, but they're functioning through opposite sides of the same coin. One of them is seeing things as they are right now, and the other one is seeing where things are coming from and where they're going, essentially. And so this is another way in which the 7 habits, whilst the principles and the process is universal, the way in which they are applied will very much depend on the person, their natural preferences and their state of mind at that point in life and so on. And this is also an area in which a Jungian coach can actually help someone on this path to focus their practice in a way that is most conducive to their particular set of challenges. We also use these two facets of bare attention and clear comprehension when we do shadow work, because when we do shadow work, of course, we are asking questions that bring the client to insight. So that's a bit like clear comprehension. And we're asking questions like, what would happen if this person never changed? Or, what happens to a person who behaves in this unwholesome way indefinitely? And why is that so bad? And so on. So we're practicing clear comprehension there, and we're bringing the client hopefully to some insight. But then we have to actually work with what's coming up. So we're then practicing bare attention on the emotion, because the insight alone is not enough. We need to also allow that emotion to shift. And so you can see here clearly how neither one of these opposites on its own is enough to attain to individuation and integrate one's mind. We have to bring together the opposites. And this is a Jungian idea known as the Transcendent Function. And so this is another place in which the unity of spiritual practice and the mental discipline with the Jungian psychology is a really powerful combination for an individual looking to integrate their mind. I'm going to share with you now a concise tip on how to actually practice habit 6 in daily life. We've talked about the 3 facets, but there's a little mantra that I sometimes use that I feel brings it all together really well. And it's just a very simple little phrase to carry around with you to just help anchor you back to the practice of mindfulness all day, every day. Because we're not really trying to think too much as we do this. We don't really want to be going, what am I doing now? Am I doing bare attention? Am I doing this? Am I doing that? Here's something you can bear in mind as you practice mindfulness. That is to do one thing at a time, take it slow, and let things go. Now, if you just bear that little phrase in mind, do one thing at a time, take it slow, and let things go. I find that personally just a very easy little mantra to remember that anchors me nicely back to the practice of mindfulness. There's a few little useful points in there, because one thing at a time, that naturally brings us into a state of mindfulness, because by setting the intention to do one thing at a time, then we're likely to notice when actually the mind is becoming disparate, and then we can take action to bring the mind back on track. Take things slow is really useful, because often what pulls us off the object of focus or whatever it is we're doing is the fact that there's just a preponderance of data, there's just a preponderance of sense information, of things happening around us. It's very hard for the mind to keep pace, because when we are being mindful, essentially what we're doing is we're keeping pace with what is happening. Moment by moment, we are with it, we're locked in, we're staying there. And so if we can just slow the mind down, then it's a lot easier just to keep pace with what is happening right now, and we're far less likely to actually be pulled off track by opportunities for distraction and opportunities for craving or aversion that we might encounter in the world. And the last thing is simply let it go. Now, again, bringing on board a Jungian idea, Jung thought of the mind as an energetic system. And so when we let things go, really what we're doing is we're bringing the mind back to unity, because when we're holding on to something, it's really like the mind is being pulled in these different directions. So by letting things go and bringing the mind back to an object of focus, we're kind of unifying the way in which our mind is working in that moment. And so if we can just bear that in mind, do one thing at a time, take things slow, and let things go. So whilst Jung himself wasn't especially focused on mindfulness and the mental discipline aspects of the path to individuation, I think it's fair to say that without mindfulness, without present moment awareness, an individual is not going to be able to sustainably move their mind towards individuation. Paying attention to what is happening and then enabling oneself to make skillful decisions based on that is absolutely necessary in order to bring the mind to a state of wholeness. Now that said, I am going to end now with a quote from Jung, which does sort of step into this area a little bit. So here we go. Self-reflection, or what comes to the same thing, the urge to individuation, gathers together what is scattered and multifarious and exalts it to the original of the one, the primordial man. In this way, our existence as separate beings, our former ego nature is abolished. The circle of consciousness is widened, and because the paradoxes have been made conscious, the sources of conflict are dried up. I hope that was useful, guys. I shall chat to you next time.